much hand in hand. But first of all, I was going to share my screen with you because we have to be able to answer a question, and that question is this. We'll just admit these people that are still popping in, which is, do you ever feel guilty or anxious when you're turning someone down? And if we ask ourselves, we often do, we often feel very guilty or anxious about saying no. And when we say no, it can cause all kinds of feelings inside of us. And some people have a really hard time when we're saying no. Let me just do this again. There we go. Okay. So when we're doing our best, it's very hard sometimes just to say no to people, but it's so common. I see so many people here that have problems saying no, meaning no, and sticking to it without feeling like they've done something terrible or they've done something wrong, when actually all they've done is assert their boundaries. So if you're here and you're thinking, yes, sometimes I do feel guilty or anxious when turning someone down or saying no, then first of all, please know that you are not alone. It's a really super common way to feel, and something that I work with here in this office on a weekly basis. So what we're going to look at, we're going to have a look at 7 ways that you can say no, and some of the things that you can do to kind of make it easier for yourself to be able to do that. And one of those things, first of all, is to learn how to recognize your own no response. And to do that, we have to kind of listen to what our body is actually telling us. And often we know what yes feels like. We often think that's a good feeling, and often think that no is a bad feeling, but it's not. It's just a different feeling. And we need to really get away from this idea that saying no is a bad thing. We're all taught this from being pretty young, that saying no is a bad thing. We're taught that we shouldn't say no, and all of those kinds of things, when actually no is a complete sentence. It's a word that we can use. It's a word that we can, it's certainly not a selfish word to say. And sometimes it's absolutely necessary for us to say no. But that's when people often get really overwhelmed, and they're not feeling good because, they didn't say no. So it's important that we're able to do that. So the first thing we need to do when we're learning how to say no is to really listen to our yes and our no responses. And this particular exercise that I'm just going to talk you through, I'm going to invite you just to kind of sit back and kind of feel this with me. There is a recording, and there is a more detailed version of how to go about doing this in the ebook and the resources that I've just kind of signposted you towards. And I'll pop in the chat again at the end of this session, so anybody that's joining us after can get those resources too. But the key really to recognizing our own yes and no responses is really to kind of feel it, to feel how we feel about it in our body, and to practice doing that, and then practicing listening and honoring that. So often we feel no, but we actually don't respond to it. We kind of pretend it's not there and go ahead and do stuff anyway. And then that's when we start feeling that overwhelm. So if for a moment, if you just close your eyes and imagine that you're thinking about something where you said the word yes, you meant the word yes, your yes was honored, and all kinds of wonderful things might have occurred because you said yes to something. So I want you just to think about, if you close your eyes, think about a time when you said yes, you meant yes, and just say the word yes over and over in your mind. And you must mean it. You must do it with some conviction. We don't want any half-hearted yeses. But as you do that, just notice how you feel inside. Notice if you feel that sensation within your body, and then where you might feel it. Notice if you feel kind of open or closed when you're saying yes. What's your posture like? So if I'm saying yes, it's a very open, I feel kind of upright. Is there any tension in your body? And if so, where is it? And just kind of notice your expression and how you're feeling. Are you smiling? Are you frowning? or is there something else? So that yes, yes, yes. Now we all know, we all expect yes to feel good, but I want you now to do the same thing with a time that you said no. And it is vitally important that you use a time when you said no and your no was heard and respected. So, you know, a time when that no was absolutely heard and respected. And again, just allowing yourself just to say no over and over and over again. And again, doing that with some real conviction, like you absolutely mean it, like you're not taking no for an answer and you know that no is going to be heard. So that word no, no, no. And you must really mean it. You must really mean it. And just noticing where you feel that no in your body again, just like we did with the yes. Again, notice your posture. Are you open? Are you closed? Is there any tension in your body? If so, where is it? And are you smiling? Are you frowning? And something else. Now, in a moment, we're going to calibrate. We're going to calibrate those feelings and we're going to amplify them so that your no's can eventually become as strong as your yeses. But what I want you to know that yes and no aren't good and bad feelings. It's not that yes is a good feeling and no is a bad feeling. They're just different feelings. And they're different feelings because they're there to tell you something. And we have to listen to what our body is telling us. We have to really take note of how we feel so that when we're saying yes and no, that we feel our yes and no, that we're really honoring that we're not kind of betraying ourselves, if you like, by not really listening to or honoring our own yeses and nos, or then because then we end up saying yes when we mean no. So now we're going to calibrate and amplify these yeses and nos. And I'm going to ask you some questions. So I want you to close your eyes and listen to these questions and ask yourself these questions. And I want you to notice feeling the response. Now, these questions, they're just kind of everyday questions. There's no big questions here. There's no kind of triggering questions, but just feel the response in your body. Okay, so ask yourself, am I hungry? So just, am I hungry? And notice, is that a yes or is it a no? How about, did I sleep well last night? And again, just notice just how that feels. Do I like coffee? Just notice if that's a yes or a no. Do I like the feeling of sunshine on my skin? Do I like rain on my skin? Do I like feeling cold? Do I like feeling too warm? Do I enjoy conflict? Do I like snakes? Do I drink enough water? Do I like listening to music? Do I enjoy crying? Do I like the taste of chocolate? And then just opening your eyes. And then just knowing and noticing how that feels. So can you feel the difference between your yeses and nos when, or at least start to feel the difference between your yeses and nos? Just give me a nod or a shake or, yeah, awesome. Cool. Okay. All right then. So you can practice doing this, and you should practice doing this. And as you practice doing that, you can amplify that yes and no even more. You can really kind of fine tune it. And then after a while, if you just do this in everyday life, allow yourself the time just to feel your yeses and nos. Sometimes we feel them very strongly, but it's good to practice on things like, do I want a cup of tea? You know, yes or no. Just kind of really notice how your body's reacting. And then after a while, you have to stop looking for it. You just feel like it's just there when you need it. But the key to this is that you honor your yeses and nos, so that you really honor how you're feeling. So you're not recognizing it or feeling it and then not doing anything about it. Because that's when often, as we've already said, this overwhelm and anxiety starts to really kick in. And you know, when we're kind of saying that, do you feel guilty or anxious when turning somebody down? Quite often that is simply because people haven't often honored their own yeses or nos, sometimes often in the past. So they're kind of worrying about it. Okay, so that's learning how to recognize your no response. And as I've already said, it does take some practice. There is a resource there for you so that you can listen to that. So you can have kind of me asking you questions at your leisure over and over again so that you can really amplify that yes and no response. And then the next thing, if we're learning how to say no, is to recognize that some people will try and manipulate you. And people do that all the time. Organizations do that all the time. We are manipulated all the time, whether or not we realize that that's happening. It's one of those things that we don't always realize is happening. Even right down to things like, if you think of the last time you were asked to make a donation to charity, often what they do now, they don't say to you, do you want to make a donation to charity, yes or no? They give you what we call the illusion of choice. And often this is how people end up saying yes to something that they would rather say no to. And this is a really typical example. So they'll say to you, would you like to donate £10, £20, £30 or X amount? So the amount that's missing is zero, isn't it? You know, the amount of, or just not taking, not allowing yourself to really check in with, you know, that zero amount, whether you could afford it. It doesn't say, can you afford to give to charity? It just says, are you going to give £10, £20, £30 or X amount? Another tactic is to say, most people will give £20 or £30. Would you like to give £20 or £30? So it's using social pressure. We've all experienced that, where we think, oh my word, everybody else is giving £20 or £30, so I should give £20 or £30, when we're not really thinking about, can we afford it or whatever it may be. And there's lots and lots and lots of ways that we're manipulated with this kind of illusion of choice. Bosses do this quite often so that we can't say no. You know, things like, do you want to take your or do you want to skip your lunch today or tomorrow, or work through your lunch today or tomorrow? So it looks like you've got a choice of which day you want to work through your lunch, when actually you should be having lunch on both days. But the idea that you're not going to skip the lunch on one day doesn't really occur to you, because you're being manipulated. And the way to avoid being manipulated is actually to start to realize that it's happening. And it's starting to kind of notice some of the language patterns that people are using with you, or this idea, if somebody's giving you two choices, is to simply ask yourself the question, well, what other choices do I have? And we don't have to kind of confront people and say to them, you're trying to manipulate me. You know, if it's your boss saying, are you going to work through lunch today or tomorrow? Is actually to think to yourself, well, why should I? You know, do I actually need to work through lunch today or tomorrow? And then just say, I'm sorry. But I already have, you know, I've already got things planned for my lunch hour tomorrow, you know, you know, if that changes, I'll let you know. And that's a good way of kind of just to say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now, but if it changes, I'll let you know. So you're kind of shutting down that conversation. And it's so easy to, you know, feel bad. People often try and make you feel bad when they're trying to manipulate you. But we just have to recognize that that manipulation is there, and then stand firm within our choices, so that, you know, our no is heard, respected, and understood. The third way that we can get better and strengthening up our no's is to know our boundaries. And anybody that has done any work with me over the years or comes to any of my classes will probably tell you that I'm a bit boundaries obsessed. And the reason why I am boundaries obsessed is because they underpin just about everything that we need, and are one of the biggest sources of anxiety that people have. Because if you don't know where your boundaries are, we can't possibly let anybody else let them know where our boundaries are. And if we're not sure about our boundaries, then it's very easy to kind of be falling outside of them, so that we are doing things that we don't want to do. We're allowing people in to take more than we're willing or able to give. If we've got kind of no clear boundary, we've got stuff that's kind of floating around inside our minds and inside of our lives that takes up a lot of our time and energy, but actually things that we can do nothing about, we can't control, we can't influence. Sometimes it's stuff that's lurking around from the past that really doesn't serve us anymore. Sometimes it's relationships that are really not very good for us, but we're not clear about our boundaries and how we stand within them. And there's all kinds of stuff that if we don't have good boundaries, then it really makes it much harder to kind of feel our yeses and nos, and then to honor them and communicate them to other people. So again, you have a resource that you can download by clicking on that link that's got a kind of a guided visualization. We haven't got time to do that visualization tonight, but you can certainly access that, and it's a really great way of doing that. But the basis of it is that if you imagine, we have our skin is a physical boundary. It's very clear to me what is me and what's not me. You know, everything on the inside of my skin is me, and everything else outside of that isn't. And my skin it's strong, it's flexible, it allows things in and things out, it renews all the time. You know, it's always kind of, I'm always growing new cells and making my skin nice and strong. I look after it, I nourish it, I put good food into my body to make sure that it stays strong. Sometimes I'll put creams and things on it to make sure that it's well maintained, but it's very much, it's the physical barrier between me, what is me, and the rest of the world, the universe, whatever you want to call it. And we do have, or we can have, if we're aware of it, our psychological boundary. And that is the boundary which affects kind of our emotions, our moods, how other people impact upon us, and also very much our ability to say yes and no enthusiastically and honoring, you know, what we're actually feeling, as well as being able to give and receive great consent. So when we're talking about our boundaries, if you imagine it, like for some people, it could be a castle. For others, it might be a wall. For me, you know, I'm a bit of a kind of a sci-fi geek. So for me, it's a force field. And I'll kind of imagine and visualize that force field all around me. And, you know, I'll imagine that I'm checking in on it, making it strong, and, you know, noticing how it sounds and allow myself to feel that force field there, so that I can then decide what comes in. Just in the same way I decide what comes into my body, I can decide what's coming inside of my boundary. So if somebody's asking me for something that I can't give them, either I don't have time, I don't want them, I find them really draining, whatever it may be, then I can say no. And I can do that because I'm looking at it from outside of my boundary. And I'm thinking, actually, no, I don't want that in here. And I can kind of give it back to that person and say, I'm not able to help you at this time, or I'm sorry, I don't have time to do that, or I just don't want to, whatever it may be, or just a flat no. No is a complete sentence. So when we're taking care of those boundaries, and we do have to reinforce them from time to time. And if you're a person that in the past has been not great at saying no, it's a little bit of a shock to people when you do start saying no. So they will push back a little bit harder, and you've just got to stand firm and, you know, with your kind of, no, I haven't got time for that, or I'd love to help you with the kids, or help you pick up the kids from school sometimes, but tomorrow's not a good time for me. Maybe I need, you know, a bit more notice in the future, or whatever it may be, so that you're, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, people aren't expecting you just to do it over and over and over again. It's one of those things that sometimes we have to state, this is just for this time, or I can only do this once a week, or whatever it may be, just so that you have your boundary very, very clear. And so that also you can not invite things into your, certainly anxiety into your life that doesn't need to be there. And to do that as well, to kind of communicate that no, we have to be very clear, concise, and firm. It's very easy to feel that we're kind of to beat around the bush, I think, you know, to kind of give lots of excuses, or to certainly give a hint that we might back down, when actually we can just be very clear and concise about it. Like we've already said, no is a complete sentence. You really don't have to go into any detail or justify why you're refusing a request. And in truth, if somebody can't accept your no for whatever reason you're giving them, then you know that person might not be a true friend, certainly doesn't respect you. So you have to stand firm, because these are the people, these people that aren't respecting you and your no are the ones that you truly don't want inside of your boundary. And it doesn't actually make you feel like helping them in the future. You know, if they're really not listening, if they're not honoring your no, then you know that they're not going to honor your no in the future either. So, you know, and sometimes people will really try and make you feel uncomfortable, you know, about saying no. And we just have to, again, say, I'm sorry, no, I can't help you at that time. And they will know then that you are serious about your refusal. And another way is to be assertive, but we can be courteous. One of the things that people often worry about when they have to say no to people on a regular basis is that people will think that they're being rude. And we can be assertive. Assertive isn't aggressive. We don't have to shout it. We don't have to be annoyed. We can do it really politely. And that allows you to say then no confidently. So we're not being passive. We're not being aggressive. We're simply being assertive and courteous, or just polite. And that a way that we can do that is just to make a few little tweaks in our wording. And that will make it much easier for you to be assertive and courteous at the same time. So, you know, just those phrases, as we've already been saying, things like, I'm sorry, I can't right now. I'll let you know when I can. And that's also saying, I can't right now, and I will let you know when I can. Not come back and ask me again, is I'll let you know when I can. Another good way of doing that is to say, I'm not able to commit to that right now, but I really appreciate you asking me for help. So it's kind of saying, I appreciate you asking me. That means a lot to me. It's a nice compliment, but I can't help you with that, or I can't commit to that right now. So it makes them feel better about asking you, so that they don't necessarily feel rejected or feel put out that you've said no. You've kind of given them a nice no, if you like. And And also remind yourself this. So if we say yes to something that we don't want to do, or we say yes and we don't want to do it and then we end up not doing it, that actually makes it more difficult for the other person. So by being upfront and honest and kind of standing in our no and expressing our no and communicating our no in this assertive and courteous way, we're actually doing the other person a favor, because we're giving them time to find someone who can help them, who or might want to help them, rather than putting them off with a kind of a half-hearted or a maybe or an I'm not sure kind of response. It's much easier to reverse a no, to say, no, I'm really sorry, I can't do that. And then go back and say that you can actually, you know, my diary's cleared up, or, you know, whatever that was stopping you, I can now help you if you would like me to, than to reverse a yes, because then that kind of drops somebody in it. So it's actually much kinder to the person that you're communicating with to say no and mean it, rather than to say yes and then have to back out. Another way of doing this, I'm just going to share my screen again. So we'll just recap where we've been from now. So we've recognized that somebody might be trying to manipulate us, and people, as I've already said, will quite often do that and not realize that's what they're doing. You know, they just think they're trying to convince you rather than manipulating you. We're looking after our boundaries, so we're very aware of what our boundary is and where it is, and we can do the work around that. You have a free resource for that. To be clear, concise, and firm. To be assertive and courteous. And then if we're still struggling, we can give the question back to the person that's asking. And what that means is that if you're being asked to do something that's really too much, and it can be really difficult to say no, and you can really leave yourself feeling extremely overwhelmed if you're kind of do that, is to really just kind of put the, you know, that's often when you're worried about how the requester might respond, you know, if they're going to be upset, if they're going to be angry, if they're going to think bad of you. And this is particularly true of families and professional circumstances. Those two areas are the ones that we often worry about the most. And it allows you, if you say no, it allows you to manage your time and resources better. So it allows you often to have better relationships and also to manage your resources better. If you're so overstretched at work that you can't do anything well, then you're not going to do anything well. And then your boss won't like that. So be clear about what you are able to do. And this is really key. So if you have to do something that's beyond your capabilities or your time limits, be honest. And let that person know. So you can say, you know, put the responsibility rather back onto them. So you can say, I'm happy to do X, Y, and Z, but I would need 3 weeks instead of 2 to do a good job. What do you want to do? So you're then saying to that person, I can do this, but I can do it in 3 weeks rather than 2 weeks. And then they can decide what it is that they want you to do, or, you know, or what of those 2 things maybe that they want you to do if they've asked you to do 3 things, or if they want to go and ask somebody else because they want a great job doing, or it may be that they didn't know that you've got all this stuff going on. So if you've got a family member, I had this recently, who was saying, I want you to take me to a certain place. And I want to go on this day, and there was no reason for them need to go on that day. And I said, well, I can't take you on that day, but I could take you on a different day. So rather than me running around like a headless chicken, I can take them a day I've actually got time to do it. So it's about, sometimes it's about saying no, not now. And sometimes it's about saying no, not at all. But we have to kind of put that question back on the person that's doing the asking, to be clear about, you know, this is my no. And then it puts your time your resources within your boundary, rather than them being sapped by somebody else all the time. And that's absolutely exhausting. And that's one of the things that people that have trouble saying no have the most trouble with, because they just feel like their resources are being kind of drained out of them by all the people that are around them. I can see some nods going on here. I can see maybe a few people feel a bit that way. So if I just share my screen again with you, where are we? Here we go. So if we put the question back on the person, And the other way that we can do this is, if they're still not listening, is to use I statements instead of you statements. And when we're using I statements instead of you statements, it's very much about kind of being able to say something to the person that's asking us for something without kind of making them feel bad or guilty. So when we use an I statement, it focuses the person on how we feel rather than on kind of anything that might seem judgmental or accusatory. So if somebody says, you're always asking me to do something for you, then they're kind of a bit like that. You know, that if that's our no, that can make people feel very much on the defensive. And it doesn't make us feel good either when we're saying no in that way. Whereas, you can say to somebody, I've been overwhelmed lately and I can't help you with that right now. Then they understand why you're saying no, or, they can go and ask someone else. And it's going to be much better received, as it allows them to show empathy for the other person's feelings without making them feel attacked. So, even I'm sorry, I can't help you with that right now, rather than, oh my goodness, you're always asking me for something. And it's just a better way of communicating what you need and being able to say no without having this feeling of conflict. So it's an assertive way of doing it, not an aggressive way of doing it. Another way is statements that, when we start with the word I, is very much about things like saying, I'm not comfortable going out tonight because I have a lot of work that I need to finish up, instead of saying, you're always putting so much pressure on me. So, you're saying the same thing. The no is the same, but we're just kind of doing it in a slightly different way. And often that's, it's that, if we think about that often, in other words, when people say, I want to do something with you, let's go and do this thing. And it's like, I'm really sorry, I can't, because I've got too much work to do, or I'm too tired, I need to get some sleep, or I've got this thing that I need to do first. Rather than saying, oh my God, you're just putting so much pressure on me last minute all the time. It's just a much nicer way of communicating. And so if you're finding a way of saying no that's kind of, and you're struggling to find a way to say no, and it's often because we fear we're going to disappoint somebody or make them unhappy, or is to really, weirdly, it sounds counterproductive, but it's to actually focus in on your own feelings and tell them why. I'm feeling overwhelmed, I haven't got enough time, I need to have more rest, whatever it may be. And that isn't selfish. People say it's okay to be selfish. That isn't selfish. It is okay to be selfish, but it's not selfish. Putting your own needs first sometimes is absolutely vital to your own well-being. And if that makes you selfish, so be it, or it could just make you smart. Because if you look after yourself first and foremost, and you allow yourself to say no sometimes, then you will not only will you feel better, you'll be healthier, but you'll have better productivity at work, you will have better relationships, you'll feel better within yourself, and you won't have this feeling of overwhelm and anxiety. So this is why saying no is a good thing to do. It's not a bad thing to do. It shouldn't feel bad. It should feel good. It should feel really good to us, so that we feel good within our own skin, good within our relationships. And also, if we honor our no's, other people are much more likely to. So we're able to express those fully and properly, and allow them to be heard by other people as well. Now, if we've got that down, if we've got being able to say no down, then that allows us to have much better consent practices. And consent is something that, sometimes we have to say no to. Sometimes we're simply asked to do things that we don't want to do. And sometimes if we're stronger in our no's, we don't get caught off guard as easily, or we realize much more quickly that somebody's breaking our consent or doesn't even have it in the first place. And this helps us to kind of see that much sooner, which keeps us safer ultimately. So I'm just going to have a quick check in the chat here, just before we move on to consent, just so we've got all things in one place. Okay, so I know sometimes people have trouble finding a no where it was respected. It can be as simple as, somebody asked you if you were thirsty, would you like a drink? So if you need to start there to kind of begin to tune into that, then that is perfectly fine. I was going to put these links in here again for anybody that's joined later. That's a good way to start. Can we start with the smallest thing? Is this about, somebody asked for a drink, do you want a cup of tea? Or, do you want a coffee? Or do you want a slice of cake? And you just decided yes or no. It can be something as simple as that. Have we got any questions? And any comments that anybody wants to chime in with before we move on to consent?
Kaz, are there 2 things that you've put links in for, or 3?
There is my YouTube channel. There's the client resources. And if you go to the client resources, which is the first link, that will take you to all the resources. So there's 2 ebooks and some videos there for you.
Yeah, that one's opening up to the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the Genius link, which is just the book link.
The book, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one opens up to the video.
To the resources, yeah.
No, to the video. That's why I was wondering.
Okay. Which one is that? Is the one that says client resources?
Yes.
Okay. If you scroll down that page.
No, when I open it, it goes to your web page.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, okay. So it's
all the resources are on there, so you can just download them straight off there. It just means then nobody has to give me an email address. I don't have to, they don't have to worry about whether they consented to that or not. They're just all there. They're just downloadable or watchable straight from that place.
Yeah, thank you. I thought you were still doing Dropbox. So
no, that's not for this. No, these are free for anybody. So feel free to share them as well if you think they would be useful.
I do. Thank you. That's brilliant.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, and we'll have a chat about consent. Okay, we'll move on then. Okay, so I will just make sure everybody's muted. Not that I'm trying to shut you up or anything. We want everybody to be speaking up when they're ready. Okay, so let's talk about consent. I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, so when we're talking about consent is an agreement between 2 people to engage, or 2 people or more actually, to engage in absolutely any activity. It's not exclusive to sexual activity. Often people, when we talk about consent, we are thinking about or kind of talking about sexual activity, but actually this is in every area of life. And consent doesn't necessarily have to be verbal, but verbal is by far the most effective way of giving or receiving consent. And what it means is that if you give consent for one thing with somebody, it doesn't mean that they've got consent for everything. So if you somebody says to you, can I borrow your blue dress? And you say, yes, go and get it out of my wardrobe. That doesn't then mean they've got consent to borrow your blue dress, your red dress, your green dress, and your purple dress. They've just got consent to have your blue dress. So it's things as simple as that, and just because you said that they could borrow your blue dress on that occasion doesn't mean that they can go there at any time and take it. So, if we look at this, not only in terms of sexual activity, but also just in life, if we start to understand what consent is, how we give it, and then we've got extra to this, but the Fry's model of consent is particularly useful. You can see that here, where if you think, I always say to people, ask yourself, have I got fries with that? And that is that consent it's here, it's freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, it's enthusiastic, and it's also specific. And those things are extremely key to having good consent practices. Whoop, I'll just go back one. So when we're talking about freely given, that means there is no coercion. There's none of this, if you love me, you would. There's none of the stuff that kind of says, well, everybody else is doing it. There's no manipulation that's taken place. It's very much freely given. The clue is kind of in the name, and it's very kind of, yes. It's a very freely given yes, or and if we're not consenting, a very freely given no as well. It is reversible. So that means if you're in an activity, so it may be, I don't know, you've consented to go abseiling or something, and then you decide you change your mind, then people can encourage you to maybe give it a go, but you can reverse your consent. You can decide, actually, abseiling's not for me, I'm not going to do that. Even though everybody else is going down the side of the cliff swinging about on ropes, you can decide, actually, no, I'm kind of reversing my idea, I'm not consenting to this anymore. That's absolutely fine. The only time that consent isn't reversible is after the fact. So after, if you've been and done an activity, you then can't say, I'm reversing my consent for that, I didn't want to do it. But what you can do is reverse consent, saying, I'm not doing that ever again. So as you go into the future, you then know that's not something that you want to do. What you can't do is do something, especially if it was freely given consent, and then say, oh, I'm reversing consent now, you did wrong. That's not how it works. It has to be informed. So people have to completely understand what it is that they are consenting to. So there's no vagueness here. People need to know exactly what it is. So if somebody says to you, it would really help me, or would you go and pick up my child from school on Wednesday? And you normally go and pick up their child sometimes on a Wednesday, and you always go at 3:20 p.m. And you say, yeah, sure, not a problem. But then they say, well, actually, they're going on a school trip, so they're not going to be there until 7. And you didn't know that. It's not informed consent, because it may be that you do something at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday that, maybe you have to go pick up your own children, or you're going out for dinner, or whatever it may be. So you've not been given the right information. So it's making sure that people have got the right information when you're asking them to do something, or if you're giving consent or receiving consent, that everybody's got all the information that they need. Good consent, good yeses, are enthusiastic. These aren't, well, maybes. I might, not sure. I'm not sure if I want to do that. These are the ones where we're feeling that good, strong yes, and we're saying yes, and we're expressing our yes. And the person that's hearing it is hearing a good, enthusiastic yes. And sometimes we want to hear yes, but if we're hearing a, well, yeah, then we need to kind of check in with that person and make sure that actually there is an enthusiastic yes. And it's actually, I want to say no, but I don't know how. Sometimes we have to help people and allow people to say no more easily. And then the other thing is that it has to be specific, and that means it is for a particular thing. So this goes back to what we were saying before. If I've consented to lend my blue dress to my sister for a ball that she's going to on Tuesday, and I've given enthusiastic consent about that, but it's still very specific. I'm lending you this dress to go to a ball on Tuesday. That doesn't mean then that she can I don't know, wear it for the bonfire party on Friday as well, and it's all ruined, or whatever it may be. It's very specific about what's happening, who's doing what's occurring. It's well informed. And if I wanted to, I'm guessing I could say, well, actually now I'm going to go to the ball and you can't wear my dress. I would never do that, but because now I want to wear my dress, so I could reverse it if I wanted to. But that's I would never do that to my sister. But there we are. Okay. Now, this is the model of consent that most people know, this kind of Fry's model. And it's excellent, and it's really useful, and it really helps us think, is it freely given? Is it reversible? Is it informed? Is it enthusiastic? And is it specific? But it also, there is one question that it doesn't quite answer. And Dr. Betty Martin asked that question, and it makes it much, much easier when we start to get our heads around this about the wheel of consent, is to ask this question: who is it for? And sometimes this might seem very obvious, but it isn't always. When we start asking ourselves, who is the consent for, or who is the activity for, or the action for? And this is because there are many reasons why we might do something. So the wheel of consent is based on touch, but you can apply it to lots of other areas in life. I use it to teach about consent within hypnosis quite often, but it could be for absolutely anything. So in the incidence of touch, there might be many reasons why I might ask to touch somebody on their shoulder, for example. And that could be that I need physical contact with somebody. Therefore, the touch would be for me. It's not actually for the person that, you know, even though I say, can I massage your shoulders? It would seem that it might be for them, but actually, if it's because I need physical contact with somebody, then actually that touch is for me. It might be that I sense that the person that I'm asking, can I massage their shoulders, needs some physical reassurance, but I know has difficulty asking. So I initiate the offer. Therefore, the touch in that case would be for them. It's the same action, but one of them is for them and one of them is for me. It might be that I'm quite attracted to that person and would enjoy touching their shoulders. Therefore, even though I'm offering, it might say, you say to them, you know, your shoulders look stiff. Do you want me to give them a massage? Really, I'm offering for my benefit. So the touch would be for me. And then another example of that is maybe they're wearing a nice cozy jumper like I am, and I'm really drawn to the kind of the texture of it and would like to touch it. So I offer to give them a shoulder massage because I want to touch the fabric. And then again, that actually would be for me. It's not actually for the person I'm offering the massage for. So if we don't know who it's for, it's kind of unclear who benefits most from any of the activity or the reason for the request. And if we look at the wheel, then that very much helps us to kind of to see. You can see that the wheel's split into 4 quadrants, which is to serve, which is yes, I will, or may I. To take, which is also may I, but the difference between serving and taking, where it's something that that person is doing, but if they're serving, the action is to benefit others, and to take, it's the action to benefit you. So in the case that we've just kind of or the examples I've just kind of given, if I'm serving, it would be the person that I could see needs some physical reassurance, so I'm initiating the offer to help them. And if I'm taking, that's the one where, you know, I might like the look of their jumper and want to feel it. So really it's for me, it's not for them. And if we allow ourselves to kind of to see that, then we start to understand who it's for. And that allows us to make much better kind of agreements when we're talking about consent. So if I'm just going to go to my next slide here. So you can see when we're talking about the wheel, we can start to see how this kind of really works. So again, using the example of touch. So if I touch you the way you want, then I am serving. But if I touch you the way I want, then actually I'm taking, even though the touch essentially is the same. If you touch me the way I want, then I am accepting, I'm kind of welcoming that and and I might even ask, will you touch me in this particular way? And if you touch me the way that you want, then I'm allowing. And, that's very much for the other person. So if we're allowing, it's usually for the other person. Where we're accepting, it's for us. If we're serving, it's for the other person. If we're taking, it's for us. So we have these pairs along the wheel of consent, and it really helps us understand who the action is actually for. So questions that people might ask is, if they're serving, would you like me to touch you? Which is, again, we know then that's for you. Taking, may I touch you? So the question is, may I touch you? It's for me. It's still consensual. Still, these things are all consensual. We're just understanding who it's for. Accepting, a question you might ask would be, will you touch me? It's for me. And allowing, would you like to touch me? Again, that's for you. But all of this is inside our wheel, and because everybody knows it's, you know, it's we've got that phrase there, so it's freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, it's specific, and I've forgotten the other one. Where are we? Oh, enthusiastic. Then and we know who it's for, then we've got a much better agreement, and everybody understands what's happening and why and who it's for. But sometimes, and we don't always realize that we're doing that, we get a case of non-consent, or where we fall into the shadows of the wheel. And it's very easy to fall into shadows sometimes. So really then we believe that we're doing something for somebody else, we're serving them, when actually we're not. We're maybe being a bit of a do-gooder or a rescuer, when perhaps somebody actually doesn't want serving at that time. You know, just because we can do something and we want to doesn't necessarily mean that the other person wants us to. If we fall into the shadow in the taking quadrant, then, you know, that's sometimes where we're taking, but we're taking without consent. So that can be things like we're stealing, groping, assault, sexual assault, and the likes is always in that kind of shadow quadrant, doing something without somebody's consent. And one of the things that can happen here is where we might have agreed to something, but somebody's now doing more than we agreed to. Or, you know, one of the cases or the examples that I use here is hypnosis, where if you've got somebody who was asked to do a demonstration for a hypnosis technique, and they agreed to that, and that was all within the wheel. So that was for the hypnotist. It often seems like all hypnosis is for a subject. Sometimes it isn't. If somebody's doing a demo for me, the hypnosis is usually for me to show how to do the demo. I will hope that the person I'm doing the demo on will benefit from that, but ultimately it's for me to show everybody else how to do that particular technique. If I was then to meet that person in a bar later, you know, this happens all the time in conventions, we all meet at the bar, and it happened that this person was the most amazing hypnotic subject and had done the most brilliant demonstration for me earlier. If I then go and just hypnotize them again, basically, maybe I want to show off to my friends in the bar. Maybe, you know, maybe that's it. Maybe that, you know, my ego's run away with me, and I think, I know, I'm going to show off now and show what an amazing hypnotist I am. Then I'm at that point, I'm outside that wheel of consent. But what can happen is the person that you hypnotized before, you know, doesn't realize that they can then say no, because they consented before. And this is why it's very specific for each action. I would have had consent earlier in the day, but now I don't have consent in the evening. And that can lead to all kinds of problems, because it may be that the person was happy being a demo subject in a classroom, but not so happy doing that and doing ridiculous things with hypnosis in the bar later that day. So it's very clear about when that thing takes place. So just because I had consent to hypnotize a person earlier doesn't mean I have still later on, or in a different setting or for a different purpose. So at that point, I actually kind of become a perpetrator, and I would be taking without consent from that person, which is obviously not acceptable. If we look at the allowing quadrant, where, you know, if we've got consent, we're allowing others to act as they want within the realms of what we've agreed, is then we fall into this place of, well, if a person is taking, then what's happening is, you know, if we've fallen out of that wheel, so if you can see the kind of opposite sides match up, then that poor subject that had been so wonderful for me earlier that day then gets to a place where they're tolerating, they're enduring, And essentially they're a victim of me kind of pushing something on them that maybe they don't want at that time. So what was a consensual agreement earlier then becomes a non-consensual action, and that leaves everybody feeling not good, because quite often, you know, the hypnotist in this case, just for an example, doesn't see that they've done anything wrong. They just thought that, you know, this person had a great time earlier doing this demo. They're a great subject. They must like being hypnotized. So you hypnotize them again. And actually that person ends up feeling really embarrassed because they were dancing like a chicken or whatever it was in the bar. And then the hypnotist feels really bad because then they found out that that person didn't feel comfortable with it, or was embarrassed, or was upset by it, all for the sake of just asking for consent again. And in that case, it would have been refused, and then everybody would have known, and I could have found a different subject to play with that evening, or to show off with that evening. So, you know, these are how it's so very easy to be in consent and then fall outside of it and not even realize it's happened, just by kind of just not asking for consent again or checking in, which is really important. And then we've got this accepting, and we can accept, and that's often, you know, will you, but that can then get into where we can do this without kind of without consent. So freeloading, assumption of privilege, believing you have the right to something, entitlement, is very much outside of consent and puts you into a shadow, which again, that builds resentment. You know, all of these shadows really destroy relationships. You know, if you feel like you're being taken advantage of because you're accepting without consent, then you can see how that doesn't feel good. And if people are forcing themselves or forcing something, not necessarily themselves, but something on you, then that really doesn't feel good. And you kind of enduring again something that somebody thinks they're helping you, which isn't a particularly nice feeling. Okay, so here we go. So if we look at that, if somebody serves without agreement, this is where they're people pleasing or giving to get. So it's kind of like they're people pleasing. They don't even really want to do it themselves. Often they just feel like they should. This is where they're perhaps not saying no, or they're giving to get. So there's an ulterior motive. It's not particularly something that they want to do. If somebody takes without agreement, they can be stealing or perpetrating, which again, they might not realize they're doing it, but it's not nice on if you're on the receiving end of that. And often the person that's taken doesn't always realize that they've done that, and that doesn't feel good either. If somebody accepts without agreement, they may be entitled or exploiting. So they're maybe taking more than their fair share or what's being given to them. And if somebody allows without agreement, then they can actually be enduring something or actually a victim. And obviously that's not nice either. So, okay. So to kind of distinguish between those things, we have to understand the difference between willing and wanting. So if we look at those things, if we look at serving, so serving is willing to do something. Would you like help with that? Taking is wanting to do something. So can I borrow your lawnmower, for example? All of that's with agreement. Accepting, wanting is to have another person to do something. So it's asking them, will you brush my hair? And allowing is willing to let the other person do something. So you can touch me there if you like. So you can see that accepting and allowing, one is wanting, one is willing, and serving is taking, one is willing and one is wanting. And it's understanding where you are with those things. Okay. So let me just ask you, is there any questions about any of that? Is that all making perfect sense? You're all feeling good. Any questions at all? Because I'm going to start asking you some questions now. Let's have a look here. Awesome. Okay. So what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to get you just to pop into the chat. I'm going to just read you some of these questions here. I'm going to pop them up onto the screen and we can see. Let's see if we've got this now. Okay, so if we start combining the wheel with fries, so we've got a full meal going on now. So we're asking, have we got fries? So is it freely given? Is it reversible? Is it informed? Is it enthusiastic? Is it specific? And also, who is it for? Okay, so if Mary asked John for a foot rub, Mary asked John for a foot rub because her feet hurt, and he says, "Yeah, okay then." Just pop in the chat. Have we got consent? And have we got consent? Is she allowing, accepting, serving, taking? What do we think? And who's it for? Okay, I'll stop the share because then I can see the chat's all very well. Me saying, tapping the chat, and then I can't see the chat. Okay. Okay, it's for her. It is, absolutely. She's accepting and it's for her. Okay, let's just pop this up again. So Mary knows that John finds it calming to give a foot rub, so invites him to give her one. Who's that for? Just pop in the chat. Who's that for? Yeah. Okay. This would be for him because she knows that he would find it calming. So maybe he's upset and invites her to do that. But she's serving, but it is actually for him. It's for him ultimately. And yeah, he's allowing. So if we've got a slightly different scenario now, where are we? Just sharing. What I need to do is press pause share, not stop share. Here we go. So John has a foot fetish, but Mary doesn't know this and asks if Mary wants a foot rub. What's going on there? There we go. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is not informed, isn't it? So I would say this is probably in the shadows because the illusion is that it's for her, isn't it? But he's not disclosed why. So it looks like it's for her, but actually it's for him. And this is why if we have this understanding of things being informed and also understanding who's it for, we can start to see why, and that could apply to many different scenarios, isn't it? But in this case, we're in the shadows. So how could we resolve that? How could they have better communication? Would be for John to disclose that he has got a foot fetish, that he finds her feet attractive. She might love having her feet kind of touched, and actually it's a match made in heaven. So actually it could be, wonderful for everybody, but often people, they're kind of, it's that ulterior motive, and people do pick up on that. If we've all had that sense, haven't we, that somebody's doing something for me, but they're not really doing it for me. There's something yet to come, and that's often then when we should be listening to that intuitive no. But in the absence of any kind of real, they're just trying to do a nice thing, that's where we can often fall into trouble. Okay. So how about this one then? Mary loves foot rubs and knows that John loves to give them and asks John for a foot rub. What's going on there? Just opening up this chat. Oh, there we go. There we are. Ooh. Where did everybody go? Oh, there we go. Okay. So in this case, really, it's for both. Yeah, absolutely. It's for both. And this is what we want generally, is that the ideal situation is, and actually we can have somebody who's serving and somebody who's allowing. It's still for both, but we've got an agreement. But the best scenario ever is when actually everybody gets what they want out of it. Everybody gets the same thing out of it, or what they need out of it, rather, not necessarily the same thing. And then we've got one more. If I just share this with you again. Mary gives John a foot rub at his request, but then starts rubbing other parts of his body. What's happening there? Okay. There we go. Tuss very absolutely. So that's the thing. The foot rub was a specific thing, so we have to get consent if we want to do anything anywhere else. And that's the thing. It's that non-specificity. And that's when often people really struggle to say no, because they feel like, I've invited this foot rub. So if I've invited somebody to rub my feet, that doesn't mean that they can rub all up my legs or anywhere else. But often, because we feel we've consented to one thing, that somehow we've consented to everything. So the best thing to do is, if you're the rubber, if you like, if you're the person administrating, doing the rubbing, is then to just check in. You know, would you like me to rub anywhere else? Is it okay if I go higher up your legs? Whatever it might be. It's a very simple thing. We can also, if we're the person where we're feel, you know, that we're accepting that, you can then invite something. You say, if you want to, then you can do this. You know, that's fine by me. So we can invite more. But it's just making sure that we actually have that consent there. And that's kind of really, really important. And it's the, yeah, it can be a slippery slope if we're, so that's why we need to be checking in all of the time and making sure that we've got consent for whatever it is. This is why it has to be very specific. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen once again. So very much this is kind of what I believe, is that in any circumstance, everyone has the right to give and receive consent. And that also means that we also have the right to not give consent. You know, the opposite of that is true. It's not, you know, we have the right to give and receive consent, but we also have the right to withdraw and not give consent, and to have our no's listened to and honoured, and to be able to say those very firmly and concisely. And then if they're not being honoured, we can say, and if our consent isn't being honoured, as in somebody's breaking our consent, then that's when we can call them out and say, hey, this isn't what we agreed to. And it's okay to do that. That's protecting your boundary, so that you are able to you know, express yourself and to feel safe. And then, you know, if anybody said, you know, if there's any ever doubt that, you know, that you have you know, you expressed your consent, or you said no. Okay, so I'm just going to make this full screen. So that very much brings us to the end of our hour and a bit today. So I said 60 to 90 minutes. So we're right slam in the middle of that. I hope this has been kind of a useful explanation of, one, how to firm up your yeses and nos. We have got those resources, which are kind of hypnotic recordings on how to have better boundaries and how to firm up your nos. There are 2 ebooks on that resources page. One of them, funny enough, is called How to Say No, and the other one is Consent 101. They look a bit like this, but they're on a PDF format, so you don't need to print them off. So we can save the trees and save the earth and have a better carbon footprint. And then the other one looks like this, which is called How to Say No and Feel Good About It. So please feel free to download those, share them around, use them with my love. Any questions before I say goodbye to you all this evening? And thank you for spending your evening with me, or your day, wherever you are in the world. Feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
Hi, Kaz. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So I had a client that came in last week and I did the boundaries hypnosis with her. And the next day she said, something came up today and I just effortlessly set it outside my boundary. And I was like, yay.
There you go. Yeah. And it's just knowing how to do that, isn't it? It's a really lovely technique. That's for those people that don't know that technique, that is a technique that's on one of those videos that you can listen to. So you can set up your own and then you can facilitate them for somebody else. It's probably the technique I use with most of my clients on the first session, because it underpins less anxiety, more confidence, understanding what your boundaries are, knowing what your limits are, and this kind of decluttering of overwhelm of the mind. It's a really wonderful and lovely technique.
Juicy.
Any more little questions? I'm just
This was great. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for all those. I can just see people. Thank you for joining me. It's been wonderful. This will now, I will let this process and I'll pop it on my YouTube. So if you want to have a rewatch or a recap or share it with anybody, then by all means, please do that. You'll find it on my YouTube in the next couple of days. I will send everybody that signed up for this, you signed up with your email, I will send you one email with all the links. There'll also be an invite on there if you want to join my mailing list. You do not have to, and if you don't consent to that, because I respect your consent and your no's, you won't get anything else from me. So that said, I send out about 3 emails a year anyway. I'm not a big email person. It's more about other events, free events like this. So if you'd like to know about those, then please let me know. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm going to go home and have my tea. So there we go. Take care and good night.
Thank you.